which one you want to start with, false starts or sacks?
False starts first.
All right. What Pat said, it was louder than he expected. Is that, was there something else happening? Or?
It was a loud environment, and credit to them and their fans, they turned it up. The biggest thing that kind of affected us was getting into third and long, right? And we allowed the crowd to really get behind it. We allowed them to amp up and really turn it to another level. Really, we got to perform better on first and second down and stay out of those long distances where we're letting the crowd start to affect the game. So the biggest thing for us that we work on going forward would be we're really going to ramp up the crowd noise at practice. And if we need to get into some silent cadence stuff, we've got that ready. We just didn't feel like it was the right time just yet, and they kind of settled down after the first quarter. But obviously disappointing to have that amount of penalties and something we've got to clean up.
Looking at the sacks, as you mentioned, just what did it look like in real time, just on the field there, and then just a couple days to reflect, looking at the film? What would you make of that?
Yeah, obviously real time. You get disappointed and you kind of get down a little bit, but kind of rewinding a bit from that is what's causing that, and again it kind of trickles back to first down, right? And you got to have success on first down, you got to have success on second down, so that you can stay on schedule. So I think it was something like 90% of our third downs were third and 5+, right? And that's allowing the defense to now play their random fronts and put their ears back and go and play with confusion. So for us, it's performing better on first down and second down. Obviously penalties, like we talked about earlier, that's a big part of it, right? So that we can stay on schedule and we're not starting the drive first and 15, second and 15, right? So putting our guys in a better position on first and second down will help us with that for sure.
The penalties are a big thing from Kendall, but how technically has he looked, making that leap up from 5 levels to Power 5?
He's got such a high level of athletic ability. Like it really is insane watching that kid move around. We just got to control his technique a little bit. Like he's so athletic and so twitchy that sometimes he plays out of position. Sometimes he plays on an edge. Sometimes he'll underkick, sometimes he'll overkick because he's so fast getting to where he needs to get to that sometimes it's too far or too short. So finding a way to kind of throttle that a little bit and get him to more play within the framework of being an offensive lineman has been kind of the challenge that he's had to address here over these last couple of weeks that he's been starting.
Just curious, looking at the 2 deep with Jeff Percy still working his way back, who is behind Stanley right now that you have at left tackle?
Yeah, Giovanni Cooley will be our backup tackle at that spot right now. So he's a kid from up north, and he's kind of fits that same mold a little bit as Kendall. He's a really athletic guy and kind of fits the mold for what we're looking for at tackles. He's just young, right? He's a freshman, so he's got a little bit of growing to do from a technique standpoint, but he's showing all the promise that you would want in a young tackle.
That's the same question about the center, keeping that in the mix there. How does you get trying to shake that line?
Usually Coretta would be our backup center. So he'd move over from left guard and we would move, Isaiah or Jackson up to guard at that point. So Coretta will be our backup center, and then behind that, we've been repping Isaiah Montgomery as kind of that, emergency center, or if we get ahead, being that 2 center to come in there and close the game out.
How would you evaluate Coretta's place as a jumper in there as a starter?
I think that he's probably one of the most dependable guys as far as being where he needs to be. Like he's not going to bust. I mean, we track mental errors every week and physical errors and all this stuff, and his mental errors are like 1 over 2 games, right? Like he's really locked into the game plan. He's locked into what we're doing. We got to get his pads down a little bit and fire off the ball a little bit more. But he kind of is that same young puppy a little bit, and he's got a. He's been asked to do a lot here recently over these last couple games, and will be asked to do a lot over the course of the next few. So from an assignment standpoint, I love where he's at. From a technique standpoint, we can clean it up a little bit, but he's progressing nicely.
You obviously had the 7 sacks, but if you compare that game to, say, the Florida State game, in terms of pressure, not just looking at sacks, but in terms of how much the quarterback was under pressure, was it similar between those 2 games? And you just more turned into sacks in Syracuse?
Yeah, no, I think that Syracuse was a bit of an outlier as far as pressures onto the quarterback. I think we didn't do a great job on third and long. It's kind of where we kind of fell apart. If you look at just first and second down, I think we were efficient there. But when we got into third down, I think we encountered some of their crazy twists and crazy blitzes and crazy fronts. And just we didn't handle those particularly well as we have in the past. And, obviously, like we talked about earlier, staying on schedule and getting rid of the penalties will help us with that.
Were they doing more, like you talked about twists and stunts, were they doing more of that or just trying to set as many numbers at you?
They were trying to overload our protection, so they would, line up, basically bring 4 or 5 guys to a side and drop all one side out of it and try to overload us. I'd say we numbered things up pretty decent. We just didn't win all of our blocks, right? And that's kind of what a lot of teams will sometimes try to do, is get one-on-one matchups. And, you got to win those one-on-one matchups. And unfortunately on Saturday, we didn't win them as many times as we wanted to.
How would you assess how Ryan Bear has done so far at right tackle?
Phenomenal. He's dropped, he might get mad at me if I called him fat last year, but, he's dropped like 10 pounds. 20 pounds since last year, somewhere near 10, 15, 20, somewhere in that neighborhood. I'm not sure exactly what he weighs right now, but he's dropped weight, and his athleticism has just gone through the roof, because towards the end of last year, we were kind of sluggish a little bit, and then he realized that, and he was like, okay, I'm going to cut this weight, and he's been a different guy this year. Like, he's absolutely one of our anchors out there, and a guy that we count on to hold that spot down. And, being able to, last year he had to go over to left and then play right, he had to go back and forth and all that, and being able to lock him in there at that right tackle has been huge for him.
Last year you guys basically had one injury that it seemed like it kind of derailed the whole operation up front, like you were just talking about with Ryan moving back and all of that. Do you feel like, and obviously that was a focus in the offseason, to be better prepared for when injuries come up, do you feel like you've been able to absorb it better this year?
Yeah, and I think that might have been what you and I talked about before the season was, what kind of position are we going to be in if we lose a guy? And we said, well, we've addressed that with recruiting more tackles, recruiting Kendall and, getting Gio ready to go. And I think that's allowed us to kind of weather this little bit of a storm right here and be able to still be able to function at a high level. So I think we've done a good job in the recruiting trail of beefing that room up a little bit and preparing for any type of situation like this that may happen.
It seems like this season on the whole, the split has been heavier towards the pass than the run, but where do you feel that run blocking has been at so far this season?
Well, I mean, as an offensive line coach, I always want more. I want more and more and more. I think there's a little bit of peaks and valleys that we're operating in right now. Like there's big high highs, big explosive runs, and then there's the negative runs that we want to get rid of. And to me, there's 2 real things that stand out to me. One is we got to quit getting penalties on explosive runs. Like you look at Saturday was a great example. We had a 60-yard run called back, right? And then throughout the last couple of games, we've had 4 or 5 big runs, 20, 30, 40-yard runs called back because of penalties. So, we got to cure ourselves of the penalties, right? And then we got to cure ourselves of getting into these games like Saturday where we get the negative yard rushes, right? Like that's something through the last few games before this. You look at, how many negative yard rushes do we have? Rush where we're getting tackled in the backfield, and it's a couple, right? And then all of a sudden this game it spikes up, right? And that's those are the peaks and valleys that we've got to avoid, and they're what come with injuries and getting different guys up there playing different spots, and those are, as they settle in, those things will cure themselves.
When you talk about cured penalties, Linden, I think, is one of the more penalized guys on the team. I mean, is that a guy where you have to even say anything to him besides, hey, clean it up, or whip it up to things?
He's got a lot of emotion, right? And obviously this will be an emotional game for him this week, and we got to find a way to keep him, keep the lid on it a little bit. But there's a part as an offensive lineman where you're like, I want to see that kind of that a little bit of unhingedness as an offensive lineman, but you got to control it, right? It can't be after the whistle, it can't be after the play. And that's what we're working with him, is understanding here's the limit. Let's take it all the way up to the limit, but let's not take a step past that limit, right? And I don't need to, talk to him about that. He understands that, right? And he gets on the sideline and, he's like, oh, that's my bad, guys. I'm gonna fix that. I'm gonna be better on that. But he knows he's a bit of an extreme player, and he knows that he's got to reel that in a little bit after the whistle.
What are you guys expecting from NC State?
They'll probably be the best group overall that we face. They've got 2 really good defensive ends, number 8 and number 54. They're big, powerful football players inside. They're good at stopping the run. So, it's going to be a challenge, as far as being able to consistently stay on schedule, being able to consistently, move the ball, being able to consistently protect and all that. Our guys are definitely, they're feeling like I said earlier, Cooper's going to be a big game for him because he played there. So he's kind of trying to get him going. He's trying to rally the troops and trying to make sure that we've got a lot of energy going into this game. But they're a talented unit.
Anything else? Thank you. you, Coach. Appreciate it.
Good. All right, boys.